Today we are presenting the Genesis R&D webinar on nutrition reports. So it's going to be an overview of the type of reports that you would see in Genesis R&D. As we always do with our webinars, let me give you just a little bit of background on ESHA. ESHA was established in 1981 as one of the first nutrition software solutions, and there was a need for a wonderful way to track your nutritional data, to track foods, get it all in electronic form rather than the old pencil and paper version. So out of that was born the ESHA software. And we will be talking today about the Genesis R&D food formulation, or we like to call Genesis R&D Foods. We also offer additional solutions like supplement formulation software. We have the food processor software that is designed more for nutrition and dietary analysis. It's used by a lot of the universities and private practice dietitians. And we also offer consulting services. So we want to just help you take all of this data, all of this work that needs to be done, and provide you easy to use tools that can help you in your daily operations. As I mentioned today, we're discussing specifically Genesis R&D Foods. And Genesis was introduced in the early 90s to address the NLEA labeling regulations and requirements. With Genesis, you can work through your product formulation, work with formulation analysis, so getting that live feedback based on database values and adjustments that you can make to your formulas. You can also work in menu analysis. So for restaurant labeling, we've added more features to help accommodate that industry. And we have a variety of reporting capabilities, which we'll be covering today, as well as addressing, or the software does address regulatory compliance by preparing camera-ready, formatted labels for various countries like US, Canada, Mexico, and EU. I'll share with you one upcoming webinar that we have on the schedule. On Wednesday, May 27th, we'll be taking a deep dive into ingredient data. And what that means is basically different ways that you can view your ingredients, your formulations, and the views that are present in the software. So being able to work with that information in various ways, whether it's reports, on-screen views, and other considerations. Also, stay tuned for more webinars. We will be adding those to the ESHA website. If you visit ESHA.com and go to the events tab, you can find more information on the webinars and register for those. As always, note that this webinar is being recorded. We have all of those previously recorded webinars available on the website. So again, ESHA.com, find the events tab and webinars, and you can have access to all of our previously recorded webinars on a variety of topics, as well as today's will be added there later. As we go through the webinar, submit any questions that you have using the control panel. I have colleagues online, so they can answer your questions as we go. We don't want you to wait until the very end. Sometimes we get a flood of questions at the very end of the webinar, and my colleagues will just address those as quickly as they come in. And again, as always, we'll send you a follow-up email that will contain a recording of the slides, or excuse me, a recording of today's webinar, as well as the copy of the slide deck. So you'll have that for future reference. What we're covering today, again, is the reports in Genesis R&D Foods. So I'll go over an overview of most of the reports that we have in the software. I'm going to talk about the nutrients and the values that you may see and how to work with those values, some of the considerations that you might want to make when you're choosing to report nutrients, and the amount of precision or detail for values. We'll spend some time with some of the few of the commonly used reports in the software, and I'll discuss print and export options a little bit. And as always, devote some time to customer questions. So with that, When working with Genesis, and especially with your recipes, there is certainly a wide variety of output that you can choose to share: nutritional data, ingredients and allergens, and other pieces of information. And here you can see some of the samples of the standard reports available within Genesis, and we'll take a look at additional reports, like I said, in the software in just a bit. Each report has a default appearance and settings, but from the software settings and options, you can choose additional information to include. Depending on the intended use of your reports, you may need to consider presenting unrounded or rounded values as appropriate. And some of the reports in Genesis can supply a varying degree of decimal precision, whereas nutrition facts labels report values as rounded per the regulation that you're working in. When working with the decimal precision, you want to consider, who is this information designed for? So for instance, it would make sense to use rounded values with some decimal places showing for internal purposes, and your organization might want to determine the degree of precision that you work in when sharing information with your industry customers. So you want to provide a spec sheet. It may need to have a certain amount of decimal precision to get the proper information across. But again, however, if you're sharing information with consumers, it may be that the label, the nutrition facts label, and that rounded data is more appropriate because the label is a more familiar format, and it's considered that the rounded data might be more consumer friendly, just easier to read. So consider those as you're selecting nutrients and the amount of data and detail that you want to share. A few of the reports in Genesis have a predetermined set of nutrients, but for most, you can choose which nutrients and components are included on the various reports. To select the nutrients and components you want to see on reports, use the Nutrients to View options. And Genesis includes several predetermined sets, and I'll show those in just a bit, but you'll see sets like proximates, DRIs, and label nutrients for the various country regulations. You can also create your own nutrients to view sets based on nutrients pertinent to your organization. Or for example, if you have certain projects or that a certain client likes to see a specific set of nutrients for all of their reports, you can create those custom sets of nutrients to view to work in. And just a word on this, the list of components included in the nutrients to view, they're not only nutrients. So you'll also see components like gram weight, cost, glycemic index, USDA My Plates, and others. Global settings for reports can be set in the My Preferences area of Genesis, and My Preferences are set by each user. So they are in fact my or your preferences, and each of these can be unique to each user. And when working in My Preferences, you'll see two mentions of reports: the general reports and the reports plus. Generally speaking, the classic reports, or those section labeled reports, they have more formatting options from which to choose, while the Reports Plus are a bit more static in their appearance, but they were designed to have a clean and polished look right from the get-go. In the Classic Reports area, you'll see options like fonts, margins, header and footer, and this also includes general settings of report sections that you can include when you simply print the recipe. So if you just open a recipe and choose File Print, you can select from the report sections area which reports available open with those and display with that printed material. As I mentioned, the Reports Plus area gives you more limited options where you'll see header and footer selections. And I just want to highlight a few of the reports in Genesis before jumping into the software. So the spreadsheet, our beloved spreadsheet, is probably the report that we talk about most in webinars. And when working with recipes, the spreadsheet gives you a detailed view of the nutrient information for each ingredient included in your recipe, like you can see here on this example. And I need to stress this, we highly encourage you to review the spreadsheet for all of your recipes. One of the primary points of reviewing the spreadsheet is to look for missing values, especially for mandatory label nutrients. Missing data is indicated here with dashes. And again, you can see an example of that on this report. What you want to do if you see dashes, again, especially for required nutrients for labeling, is fill in those blanks. And we have a tutorial on working with missing data that we'll share with you after the webinar that just helps you consider how to work through and go through the steps of filling in those blanks. The spreadsheet report shows ingredient values based on the serving size that you set for your recipe. So this might be per your label serving or per 100 grams if you set your recipe serving size at 100 grams. Or with the recipe selections, you can say my recipe makes so many servings. So if your recipe made, for instance, 1 serving, then the information presented here would reflect the amount of each ingredient for 1 serving. The spreadsheet here will show if you've made an adjustment. So if you applied, for instance, a moisture loss, you'll see information about that here. And you may also see values in red on the spreadsheet report. If you see values in red, that could indicate that either an override was manually entered in the software. That's certainly a capability when working with your recipes. So if you've either manually entered an override, or if you use the nutrient calculator feature in the software to help fill in other units of nutrients, those calculated values will show in red. And then we have the label display standard 1. This is one of the reports plus formats, and we often see this particular report used as a product sheet from manufacturers to be shared with customers. Here you can see an example that this report is pretty clean. It's got a nice looking header on it. The information is presented in this particular format and order. So you have serving information at the top, you have the label format, and ingredient and allergen information. The label can be adjusted in your edit label settings. So if you wanted to see a tabular or a linear format of the label, you can certainly choose those from the edit label settings. And then we also have the view label screen. You can use that particular view as a report. So when working with your recipe, and you choose view label, this is like what would appear on the screen. So you have, again, your recipe name, you have your label and the format that you've chosen in your edit label view, and then ingredient statements, allergen statements, additional information like we talked about bioengineered status and symbols in another webinar. You can present that information here. You can use the notes, like that kosher information is part of my notes that I brought in to display on this view label. And then again, if I view print, this turns into a printable or exportable report as a PDF that can be a nice clean looking format. And then I just wanted to show the show button. In Genesis, the show button, when you're working with this view, helps you select what areas of this report or this screen you want to display. So that's the view label screen used as a report. So now I will move into Genesis and I'll run through the full list of reports and then talk more about the settings and my preferences and other areas to help you work with your reports. So in Genesis, I'm just going to open a recipe. So recipe, I'll find one of my favorites here. And from this recipe view, we have the reports tab up in this upper left-hand corner. If you click on that double arrow, then you can see the full list of reports that are available to you. I already discussed the spreadsheet report, but I'll just show that here. Again, moisture adjustments shown. If there were any missing data, you'd be able to see that indicated in red dashes. Red values would indicate overrides. There's also a label rounded spreadsheet. So similar view, it's giving you the ingredient data for each ingredient, or the nutrient data for each ingredient, but these values are labeled or rounded per the label settings. So you can see unrounded values and rounded values, quite similar, a little bit cleaner look. The multi-column report, this one is often used. We've seen this with supplier information. By default, the multi-column report gives you a simple list of the nutrients per serving, and it's often, can be used as a one-page format, so it's easy to work with. You also have options to display additional columns. So up in the upper right-hand corner, you can show information per serving. You can choose to show per 100 grams. You can also, whichever regulation or setting you're working in, profile setting you're working in, you can include the recommendation values and the percent of the recommendations based on this serving information. So choose from those columns as needed. If you want to change the profile, so right now I'm working in my US label adult. If you want to change the recommendation and the profile information, I went to the recipe tab, edit recipe, and there's a compare to option. So here I have it set to US label 2016, which is the default. But if I wanted to work with a specific population or any of those from the list of DRIs, I can certainly select that. And you may have noticed that the recommendation set and the percent recommendations changed. The amount per serving didn't change because I haven't changed my recipe, but the feedback and percents and recommendations that it's based on have changed. So again, that was through edit recipe, select a different profile under the compare to setting. And that's how you would work with that report to a bit more customization. Let me just close those. Go back to my reports. The single nutrient report. This one is often used to take a closer look at how the ingredients are contributing to the overall nutritional content of this formula or recipe. When you open this report, you can see a list of the nutrients available. So this is based on my nutrients to view set, and I can select from any of these. And what this report does is ranks my ingredients in order of their contribution to the total. So here I've selected protein. It's ordering my ingredients by which is contributing the most to least amount of protein per serving. I can switch through any of these to take a closer look. This can be useful if you are considering your formulation, say you're needing to reduce calories or reduce sodium or increase dietary fiber. You can look at any of these single nutrients, order those, and help identify what is contributing the most. Do I need to swap out to a different oil to reduce saturated fat or to that degree? So one way of working with the ingredients and the feedback from the software. So again, that's the single nutrient report. We have the bar graph report. And similarly to the multi-column, you can view recommendation information. So by default, it's per serving information and just gives a bit of a, the bar graph form of information. Choose your recommendations and percent. You can take a look at those. If you want to switch that profile information, just as you would with the multi-column, go to the recipe, edit recipe, and compare to select a different profile. And the calories and fats charts I'll show both of these. So calories and fats, the sources of the calories, we have in a pie chart and in a bar graph form. These have been in the software for quite some time. The source of calories, calories come from protein, carbs, fat, and alcohol if it's present in the ingredients. So this is just giving you, again, kind of that graphic image way of looking at the data. The sources of calories from fat, just a word on this. So it's breaking it down, again, showing that where the fat sources are coming from in terms of saturated, mono and polyunsaturated fats, trans fats, and then this other. Just a note on the other group, it's by calculation. So if mono and poly fats are not reported for ingredients, then the other may be inflated just by calculation. Anything that's not saturated and trans would be reported as other if it's not being reported as mono and polyunsaturated. So just keep that in mind if you're viewing that report. And the other fats, if all were reported, we would expect to see the other fats as very minimal and perhaps accounting for the glycerol backbone of fatty acids. If that number is quite high, then we would expect that would be due to unreported poly and monounsaturated fats. Then we have so I was working through these reports. These are the classic reports, those colorful icons. Those indicated with the blue notebook icon are the reports plus. So just know that from this view, you can tell which are which are the classic and which are the reports plus. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed one. It was the My Plate. My Plate just gives you a view of your recipe per serving in terms of USDA My Plates. So you have your recommended food groups, the amounts for recommended based on USDA My Plates, and then the total intake or the top line of each section shows how much your recipe is contributing, again, in terms of USDA My Plate equivalents. So now reports plus. We have dairy density. The dairy density report is aimed specifically for use by the ice cream manufacturers. So it identifies fat, water content, and then using an industry formula, it's identifying the total solids, water weight, and then the density of the formula. So it's quite specific to industry. Label display standard 1, like I showed you on the slides, is quite similar to the label display standard 2. There's just some slight formatting differences going on. Let me just get these shown a little side by side. Essentially, the primary difference is the placement of the ingredient list and the allergen information. So you've got your serving size information, you've got your formatted label, here ingredients and allergens, one on top of the other, here ingredients, and then allergens over to the side. So those are set, this placement of the pieces of information are set within the document. Like I mentioned, you can go to your edit label features and change the format of the label that's used here. So if you wanted to see tabular or linear, you could certainly choose that. There's another, the label display tabular one. This one not so much relevant anymore because of the fact that you can change the label formatting here. And then the recipe cards. I'll show these side by side as well. So these reports, the recipe card formats do show your recipe information. And so this one has a per serving display. And then this one is the 100 gram. So again, Recipe information is displayed, so you probably don't want to share this with the outside world. This may be more of an internal type document, but then it does give you the option of the per serving or per 100 grams between those two reports. And then the recipe cards reports here. So these similar information has the recipe information and then shows you the label. So again, perhaps an internal type or for your test kitchen or for preparation to actually pass on the formula, the recipe itself. And then again, just some slight differences in the arrangement of the pieces of information on these reports. And that brings us lastly to the protein quality report. And this particular report we've covered in a different webinar in much detail when we're talking about PDCAS. But essentially the protein quality report shows the quality of the protein content of a recipe. And I do want to point out a few mentions here that this report is reliable when you have amino acid data reported for your ingredients. So if you have missing values for your amino acids for your various ingredients, you're likely to see zeros or highly underreported information. So you want to check your ingredients, use the spreadsheet report is a good way to investigate that individual ingredient information. You can show your spreadsheet report, choose to see amino acids on your spreadsheet report, and make sure that you're seeing values for each amino acid of the essential amino acids that are used here on the protein quality report. And then another note is that with decimal precision, in the My Preferences, you can set the decimal places. This report tends to be more accurate with a higher amount of decimal places. So these numbers, if you have very, very small amounts of amino acids in a per serving of recipe, you may get some zeros or be missing some of the detail. So set your decimal places to higher places. I'll show you that in just a minute, and you'll expect greater accuracy from this report. So again, we have a webinar on PDCAS that gets into this report much more. The ideal ratio here in Genesis is based on labeling, US labeling purposes. So it's using an FAO WHO protein evaluation document as mentioned in the CFR for US labeling purposes to compare the actual amount of the amino acids present in your food, comparing those to the ideal ratio that has been determined by FAO and WHO to be useful in determining your protein quality. And then one last area, so that's kind of sums up the reports as we see them. But one other area that you can use, as I mentioned, as a report is your view label. So if I go to my recipe and view label, I have this nice screen to work in. I use this one quite often. And so I've got my recipe information. I have the nutrition facts label here as I've selected in my edit label settings. I can go in and include more information about servings and choose additional voluntary nutrients, work with that in my edit label settings. But once I've formatted all of that, I have my ready to go label here. I have my ingredient list information, working with the ingredient statement. I have my allergen information, and then I can also include notes. So in my recipe, I have notes that I could include. So I have various notes fields. I could enter notes about the formulation, about the analysis information, any that I need to, or it could be notes that are more consumer facing that tell more about this recipe or this product to the consumer world. So I can include all of those. And then I mentioned the show icon here on the bar. This lets you choose which pieces of information you want to include. So I can choose from this list, or I can omit any of these, depending on what I want to see here. And then I can choose File. Here I'll do Print Preview. And this becomes a report that I could either print to PDF or print as a hard copy. And when working with those settings, just in general, we have the file settings. So we have print hard copy, print to PDF, print preview like I showed, the print setup, just like in what we're familiar with. When working with documents, we can choose the printer, margins, and those type of information when setting up the printer. So from here you can see all of these options available to you in choosing the output from the reports available in the software. So take a look at these reports, see which might work for you the best. And then let me show you a bit of more customization that you can do with the settings. And then I do want to mention you can look for more options in the next update of Genesis that is in the works right now. So from there, I will go to my preferences. So from the Home tab, we can go to My Preferences, and this is more of a global settings approach to working with your software. So not only with reports, but various areas of the software. And I'll highlight a few of these options. So in the general space, in My Preferences, here's where I mentioned decimal places. You can choose the amount of decimal precision that you want to include on general reports by setting those here. One area I want to mention is the auto open reports. So this would be every time I open my recipe, maybe I also want to see the spreadsheet and the multi-column or the label. So I can check any of these reports in the classic reports area. So I open my recipe and these are going to open along with it automatically. So just a handy setting to have if you know that you always want to work within certain views of the information. Here in the general area of the My Preferences as well, we have the Show Cost. So if you want to show cost information on reports, you can certainly do that. You want to check that box. And then down here in the Reset Preferences area, just want you to know that if you fiddle with your software like I do a lot, you might want to at some point go back to the default preferences. So that would be a reset there. That will take you back to all the default preferences. So just keep that in mind, not just for reports, but everything, but certainly an option there. And then we have the reports area. So again, those classic reports or the colorful icons that we see in the reports tab. So here you can see there's a bit of general. You can choose the font. You can set margins, header and footer areas. So there's the title information that would just show up on reports. If you dive a little deeper into the header area, you can include a header image. So you might want to include your logo, your company information, rather than this one. This one should be empty. This area should be empty by default, but here you can attach an image file and bring that in to include as your header image for your printable reports. And then of course footer. And then the reports sections down here. This would be when I open, if I choose to print my recipe, if I choose to not necessarily select reports from the reports tab, but I just have my recipe open, go to File, Print, I can choose which sections of information. So I can choose to include my ingredients, my recipe information or not, the list of the foods, the nutrient detail, if I have yields information. Any of this, I can choose to include notes or not here if I print. And then on down the list, you can also see the reports. So here would be another place. If I print my recipe, I can also choose to print specific reports along with that. Lower down this list gets into ingredient choices, composite ingredient and menu options. But this upper area would be for the recipe information. And then Reports Plus. Here again, you can see it's a bit limited when compared to the reports area. So you can choose headers and footers, the header image. So here, I believe we do, with the Reports Plus, we do offer or include that generic ESHA header image. My file is different from what you may see because I brought my own in. But this is where you could add a header image. So when you're printing or sharing your reports, it's based on your information. So that's my preferences. I'm going to close out of there, and I will just show you. Let me show you one area, the Reports Plus. So we have that nice header. This is a header image that I brought in, just to give you an example of what that's looking like, but you could change that to your company information. I talked about nutrients to view as we've done in previous webinars, but again, just want to address this because it does apply to the reports and how much information, which nutrients you want to display on reports, setting your own set of nutrients that you want to display. So in the nutrients to view, again, that's from the Home tab. This might be the view that you see when working with recipes themselves. So the edit recipe, the nutrients. This view, nutrients to view, will set the information displayed here as well as on your reports. And in this view, we include several presets or predetermined sets of nutrients to view. I often work in the label nutrients because that's just the data I happen to view most often, but we have mandatory and whole or all sets for US, Canada, Mexico, and EU. So those are already determined. We have new and old sets for US and Canada. And then we have some basic sets up above. So proximates, the nutrients that make up the weight of a food. We have the DRIs, glycemic index, USDA, the MyPlates. And then you can create and add your own. So in this view, this top section up here would show any sets of nutrients that you've added. And to add sets of nutrients, the very first option is modify. So click on modify and then edit. When you click on modify, it will show you the set that you currently have selected. Choose edit, and in this left-hand side, you'll see the available nutrients. The right-hand side are the selected, those that are already selected for this set. And from here, you can just click through the list and add anything that you would want to include on a report or on your screens. Double click, use the arrows. If you want to completely start over again, just wipe everything out and build your own set from scratch. But once you've done that and created your custom set, you want to choose Save As and then give this Nutrients to View set its own name that's meaningful to you. So you can remember which one it is. It will save to your nutrients file. And then once you've added those sets, then you'll see those grow up here. So these are all sets that I've added based on my needs. So I've touched on printing a bit. But again, just want to mention again, we have the file print options here, also the icons up here. So print preview, whatever report I'm working in. This is a print preview of my recipe. So if I choose to just simply print my recipe, it's going to add the header if I've included one, the sections of the report that I've chosen to include. And then this could be printed as a PDF, hard copy, whatever I need to do with that. So just general print settings as you might expect from print options anywhere. And then exporting. So when working with reports, you have some export options, and saving to PDF is probably the most common thought we have when we think of exporting reports. So just printing to PDF would give you the report as formatted. So if I have my multi-column report and I print this to PDF, then it's just going to retain this formatting, showing what I need to show. You will also see export as text for the for these options. So export as text, so that can capture this information and then just simply export it as to a text file that I could use elsewhere as needed. And then back to that, the view label, just a few notes on here. So again, this can be used as a report. I can print this entire screen as a report in itself, save it as a PDF, have a nice clean document to share with someone. Or if you're focused on the label itself, you can right click on the label image, and this would allow you to export this label as an image. So I can save it as a file itself. I can copy to the clipboard, or I can choose the print as vector file. And by doing that, I can export this label image out and use it in, say, a graphics illustrator application like Adobe Illustrator or something to that effect, where then I could modify that image, could work with that vector file, with that format, and make changes to the image itself. So that's a way to export the label itself and work with that image, either by export as a file or print as a vector. So we've covered a fair amount of data or a fair amount of information talking about the reports, and just a note on the exporting, if you have questions about exporting batches of information, batches of data, and the values, I'm going to refer you to tech support, because that conversation quickly becomes individualized. You may have very specific questions about the fields, the pieces of information that you would want to export. And we have previous webinars that are devoted entirely to exporting and that approach with the software. So I'll refer you to tech support, and we will send some resources with information and webinars, past webinars on exporting to help you there. But if you do need more information than just this brief period offers, I'll refer you to our training team. We schedule various trainings throughout the year, numerous opportunities for you to really take much deeper dive into Genesis, the features, approaches, best practices, whether it's just you as an individual or if your organization needs to schedule a training. Right now, with things as they are, much of the training is web-based, and we have a few training sessions coming up very soon. At the end of this month, we'll have the traditional Genesis R&D training. So that covers Genesis R&D Foods, instruction on the features of the software, as well as kind of basic discussions about regulation, working with the labels. And this format is either a 2 or 3 day training or a 1-day advanced training. The first 2 days of the 3-day training would offer the basic instruction. The third day would be viewed as a more advanced. So you can either register for those first 2 days, register for 3 full days, or if you already have a good handle with Genesis and need that more advanced approach, just attend the third day, that last day, as a single day training. So get in touch with our training team if you have questions there. We have another training in May that will focus on menu labeling, restaurant menu labeling. So again, covers the basics of the Genesis features, but then the regulatory discussion will focus on menu labeling, and that is just a 2-day training. And then in June, we have scheduled the Canadian labeling training. So again, begins with that discussion and overview of Genesis features, but then the regulation portion of this training will focus on Genesis labeling and all the options that you need for Canadian labeling. We have just, if you have any questions about arrangements or attending registration, or if you have questions about arranging a web-based training for your organization specifically, then get in touch with our training team at training@ESHA with any questions, and then you can see the full schedule for training events coming up throughout the year on the ESHA website. Before we
Great
get
job,
into,
Alicia.
Thank you. Hello, Chris.
You've been talking for quite a while. I'm here to rescue you.
Thank you so much. I'll hand it over to you to give a bit more
Great information, but don't wander off too far. I have some questions for us.
I will stay put.
Before we dive into the questions, we do have a slide here for contact information, and just a reminder, we are sending this out to all attendees. So you'll have helpful resources and the links to contact our various departments, whether it be sales support or consulting questions, and you can check out our marketing information on blogs, our e-learning center, and our newsletters. So great information there that will be included in the slides. With that, we will get to some of the questions we provided. Number one, how can I save a report to PDF on a Mac?
You can do that, and I can't show you right here. So what I will do is with the follow-up email that we'll send out today, we have a wonderful article written by our tech support crew that explains the steps of how to get your PDF files created with Mac. So look for that in the follow-up email. Thanks.
I've never heard our tech support mentioned as a crew before. I like that. Question number two, can I copy the spreadsheet into Excel, Alicia?
Yes, you can, and I'll go ahead and show you that. So let me jump back into Genesis. And with my recipe open here, if I view the spreadsheet, so go to reports and view the spreadsheet, here I have all this wonderful information. Right click in this screen and then export. I'm just going to export this to the clipboard. Then if I open up Excel, I can just copy right into here or paste right into here. So you can see all that information from my spreadsheet report into Excel, and now I can work with the information with all of the allowances that Excel provides.
Excellent. Let's see, question. If I want to track a nutrient that is not already in Genesis, how can I add that? So how can I add a nutrient to Genesis?
Sure, and there's certainly times when you may want to do that. So from the top ribbon here, the database tab allows you to make some changes. You can delete and modify and do some fun stuff here. But in the modify section, the very first tab that this takes you to is nutrients. And from here, you can add a new nutrient. So if I do that, just fill in the fields as I go and then save this. I'm just going to add this as a user defined. Save this as a new nutrient. Now that I've added it, when I go to my nutrients to view, then it would be available for me to include in my set of nutrients to view and then work with it on reports. One note here is that here we go, the betaine. When I've added that nutrient, it doesn't populate anything, so I'm just going to have a bunch of blank information. So if I add a nutrient or a component to track, then I need to also populate that information for my ingredients. So just keep that in mind.
Great. What does it mean when I see a redirected, in quotations, PDF printer indicated?
Sure, so you may have different PDF printers installed or available on your computer or system. So you might see redirected PDF in your list of available PDF printers, and that just refers to extra or local options that could be selected from the list of available. One example where we've seen this is if you've migrated from the on-premise version of Genesis to the cloud, you may have already had a local PDF printer installed, so you might just see redirected for some of those. Generally, we would recommend that you use the Genesis PDF printer that comes along with it, but if you have any questions about the selections or if you run into any issues, just contact tech support and they can get you straightened out there.
Great, thank you. Let's see, how can I integrate my supplier data into Genesis? Boy, this is a popular question that we get in sales every day. Integration is a broad topic. We have a couple of tools, ESHA Port and a Genesis API, that are designed for automating your workflow and helping you integrate the information in Genesis with another third-party software platform, website, etc. So what I would recommend here, just like reports, the integration gets very customized based on your specific need. So what I really recommend you doing, if you have integration or automation questions, just reach out to us in the sales department. You can contact sales@esha.com or call us by phone using the information on the slide that we provide in this webinar. Feel free to reach out to us. We'll listen to your individual need, what you're trying to do, and recommend the best tool for the job. With that, I think that brings us to a close as far as questions today. Great job again on the information you presented, Alicia. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate you joining me.
You tried to get rid of me as much as you could, but I come back. So we'll send this out. It will take us a few minutes to get the slides out to us. Hopefully if we did not address your question, we will spend time reaching out to each question and provide follow-up. If you didn't provide your question in chat, feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to help. With that, thank you all for attendance. We wish you all the best and good health, and we'll talk to you soon.